and welcome to Onward's event on rural communities and digital connectivity. I am Shivani H. Menon. I'm a senior researcher at Onward. As we become a more technologically and digitally advanced society, with our aspirations to boost science and tech, to use technology to boost business productivity, there are still places in the country that are missing some digital fundamentals. Things like access to good quality and high-speed internet, something as simple as mobile data coverage, and the infrastructure that underpins the delivery of these things. And what this means in practice is that if you're a household, you might struggle to make a speedy bank transaction, your Netflix stream might be a bit slow, and if you're a business, your employees are not as productive as they could be, and your organization as a whole is struggling with productivity too. These communities tend to be rural most often, and exactly the kinds of communities that require an injection of digital infrastructure that allows them to break out of the cycle of low economic activity and fraying public services even. We're here today to discuss how to do that. And joining me on this panel are representatives from government, the private sector, and the third sector. To my right, we have the Environment Secretary, Right Honourable Steve Barclay. To my extreme right, we have Andrea Donat, the Chief Network Officer at Vodafone UK, who's kindly supporting this event today. To my left, we have Simon Fell MP, the MP for Barrow and Furness, and the government's very first rural connectivity champion. And to my very left, we have Sarah Lee, the Director of Policy and Campaigns for the Countryside Alliance, an organization that's been one of the strongest voices on rural disadvantage. So how this event will go today is we'll hear opening remarks from each of the speakers for about 10 minutes or so, and then we will open up the floor to questions from the audience. With that, I think I will hand over to you, Environment Secretary.
Great, well, Shivani, thank you so much, and good afternoon all. And it's fantastic that Onward is focusing on such an important issue. 30% of the population are in rural communities. Connectivity is absolutely key to their way of life. But what I, in my sort of opening remarks, wanted to do was to try and put in context where the debate on rolling out faster connectivity, mobile, is often through the lens of how do people access public services, where people want to work from home. It may be even children wanting to be able to go on gaming services in the way that they could in the city and so forth. I actually think there's a much more fundamental change coming to rural communities that tends to get less pickup. And that is the way that I see the rural economy changing through science and technology, and particularly in the field of agri-tech, as we see the development of AI, as we see robotics and automation. And we really see a shift in the rural economy from a 19th century economy heavily dependent on physical labour and manual power to a 20th century which was really shaped by tractors and plant and machinery, to a 21st century that I think is going to be massively shaped by data, by AI, by robotics, by the likes of drone technology, precision in farming, innovative areas such as controlled environment growing. So you look at the work that the likes of James Dyson is doing in Lincolnshire, or Fishers in Norwich. And just to give a bit of context to that, because one of the other battles within the rural economy is going to be on land use, on space, the many competing demands that there is within the rural economy, whether it's from the energy sector, whether it's from the environment and how we better protect nature and restore our natural environment, how we do that whilst also meeting the challenge on food security. Food security being obviously fundamental to our national security. And I think all of those things actually come back then to the work that Simon is championing for us and injecting speed into, which is around connectivity. Because you can't have the drones, you can't have the automatic pickers, you can't have the lightweight vehicles powered by solar that don't compact the soil and are therefore better for the environment without actually the connectivity to make those work. You don't shift the jobs in our food packaging plants from manual jobs where people are stacking the box of crisps or the beetroot into a container into something that is automated if you don't have that connectivity. And I think the reason that in turn matters so much is because one of the questions I'm often asked is, how do we make the rural economy more attractive, more sustainable to the next generation? And the way that we do that is by driving productivity, which in turn then enhances the profitability of those businesses, but also by opening other types of career opportunity within the rural economy. So rather than perhaps some of the career routes of the past, you then get to work on the AI cameras, the software that allows the sprayer to use 70% of the pesticide because it can recognize whether it is a weed or it's soil. And of course, that is fantastic for the environment, 70% less pesticide. It's also fantastic for the farmer on food production because 70% of the cost of an expensive input. But you also then open a totally different type of career within the rural economy to one where previously in the past people might have felt they needed to go to a city, to a rural environment to pursue some of those more science, tech, automotive type careers. And to give you a sort of real life example of that, if you were to go to Essex, as I have, you'll see, for example, scientists that have been working at Ford who are now moving into the agriculture sector because they're taking their transferable skills from motor manufacturing, which has embraced many of these things around robotics, into the agricultural sector in ways that people don't always foresee. In fact, when I was talking to James Dyson, he was talking about how his engineers, sometimes before they go to Lincolnshire, it's not necessarily the secondment that they've identified earliest as the one that they're most intent on going on. And yet, having experienced it, they suddenly find it so fascinating working at the cutting edge of agri-tech that actually it's the one that they want to stay in once they've experienced that. And I think that matters in terms of sometimes the perception within the rural economy, where the opportunities are, where the growth is, the nature of the businesses that are there. And I think what is coming is a very significant shift around how science, tech, automation really reshapes our rural economy. And perhaps a good illustration of that is on the data side. Again, we tend to have quite a siloed sort of data approach. I think there's some interesting questions. Who owns the data? Whether it's the farmer, whether it's the producer of the farm equipment, whether it's a software supplier, where is that data? But I think that use of data within the rural economy is one of the issues that is going to be fundamental. In terms of then how that translates into government policy, I mean, Simon is our champion on this, and in terms of the sort of challenge I, as a member of cabinet, I'm so grateful that he's leading on, is how do we inject pace? How do we inject more pace into the role of that? I know it's something Vodafone and colleagues are very focused on. We've assigned £5 billion. It is an area, a key focus. It won't surprise you that politically, given the nature of constituents, the rural economy is of huge interest to my parliamentary colleagues because it tends to be the nature of seats that are often represented by my colleagues, including my own. I'm in a constituency in the Fens in northeast Cambridgeshire, a very rural constituency. So how we ensure there is that connectivity, whether it's on a mobile or on the internet, is of huge importance to me with my constituency hat on. But it's also important if we're going to attract the skills, the jobs, the next generation that the rural economy needs. So I won't steal Simon's thunder on some of the specifics on the programme. What I wanted to do, Shivani, was just set a bit of wider context. And I think connectivity is not simply about perhaps the more traditional view, how do we access public services, how do we work from home? It's actually about the reshaping of the rural economy through science, tech, data, in a way that I think we're seeing with the automated pickers, with the drones, with the machinery that's coming through, the software that's coming through on our food manufacturing side. And all of that has to have the enabling connectivity that we need through both the rollout from a mobile point of view, but also from a connectivity. And then within that, I think collectively there's a comms piece, which is where we then make that accessible. How do we ensure that the take-up is happening? I think the take-up, again, is still lower than where we would like it to be. And I think that then is a communication piece collectively for everyone in the room as to how we then, where we've got access, we make sure that people make the most of that. So that's probably, Shivani, as a starter, how I would set the scene.
Thank you. I think you've painted a very optimistic and positive vision for the future of the rural economy. Andrea, could we come to you next about what Vodafone and other businesses in the sector are currently doing to widen access to broadband and mobile data coverage?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Andrea Donner from Vodafone. I'm the Chief Network Officer, so I deal with everything network-related, infrastructure-related. First and foremost, I wanted to thank Onward for hosting us in this event, and my panelists for taking their time for such an important topic, which is very close to our heart in Vodafone. We truly believe in our endeavor to bridge the digital divide. We have worked relentlessly in the last few years trying to actively support and practically support the UK population across the digital divide by offering very affordable connectivity and devices, helping bridge that digital skill set divide that Steve talked about earlier in terms of businesses that don't have access to those digital skills that are necessary. Through our Everyone Connected program, we have donated connectivity for free and devices for free so that the population in the UK that don't have easy access to this resource have that. We've also commissioned some very detailed analysis and detailed research that shows that there is a clear link between not having access to connectivity, 5G connectivity, and the level of deprivation of a particular area. And we've seen that in rural areas, 46%, almost half of rurally deprived areas actually don't have access to the much needed connectivity, as opposed to only 2.7 in urban areas. And at the current pace, with this current market structure in the UK, with a current policy that was defined initially to support 3G rollout, and we've switched off 3G at the end of February, we need a new market structure that supports operators like ourselves to expand beyond just the urban areas. We saw, and we all understand, I think, the real power of some of this new emerging technology. I talk a lot about 5G, but to bring to life some of the benefits and the productivity gains that we heard earlier in agri-tech, robotics, drone, you need more than just standard 5G. The 5G we currently use is based on 4G technology. It's what is called non-standalone. So it's a evolution on 4G. The 5G we want to introduce to the UK, and I think the UK deserves, is 5G SA, standalone, which brings the true inherent nature of 5G. That's really important because it brings characteristics like low latency, below 10 milliseconds of response time. So when you're operating a robot and you press a button, there is no lag in the way that that machine device at the end of that connectivity responds. That's very key because you don't want a robot not to respond as quickly as you need it to. So we believe that the UK deserves that connectivity so that anywhere you are in the UK, you can choose to work, to live freely without having to be forced to move out of those communities. When we look at what it takes to do that, unfortunately, 5G investment is very onerous. To roll out a 5G network is 5 times more expensive than 4G. It's very intrusive. It requires new planning permission. We need to put new antennas. We need to upgrade the transmission, the backhaul, the pipes that collect all that data and bring it back. And that requires a lot of investment. In an environment like the one we find ourselves in today, our cost of capital is far superior than the return of that investment. So what we've seen in the last few years in the UK is that the UK is lagging behind all European countries. We're 17th in terms of 5G coverage out of the 25 European countries, and 21st when it comes to 5G speeds. And if we do not change the market structure, we will fall behind. I was saying to some of my colleagues earlier, I was in Amsterdam for the weekend. I took a fast train from Amsterdam to Frankfurt, the intercity. and I worked perfectly seamlessly. I took a regional train in München-Labach to Düsseldorf, and I continued to work seamlessly. We all have experienced mobile coverage and data availability on the UK trains. We need to change that. And I'm very happy to say that we found a way of doing so in a self-sufficient manner. The merger we've proposed that's going through the regulatory approval process will give us the opportunity to build a network that is worthy of the UK, that gives us the connectivity, at the same time enhancing competition in the market, because we will build the best network in the UK, which will enforce the other operators to continue invest and trigger an upward cycle of investment in the UK, unlocking what everyone recognizes as a massive uplift in economic potential that 5G can bring. The own government reports in the wireless infrastructure strategy highlight that 5G itself as a technology, and when I talk about 5G, I talk about 5G SA, the standalone version, can unlock up to 160 billion pounds of economic value in the next 10 years. The merger, if we're allowed to progress, the merger with Three will allow us to unlock about 5 billion pounds of economic value every year thereafter. And I think that is really key, to start turning what has been a vicious circle into a virtuous circle that I think that the UK deserves.
Thank you very much. Vicious to virtuous, that's what we shall take away. I might come to you next, Simon, in your role as Rural Connectivity Champion. What are some of the conversations you've been having? It'd be great to hear from you next.
Well, thank you very much, and good to see you all. My experience, so I'm a Northwest MP, my experience on Northern Rail is, I'll say, at least consistent in terms of the coverage I get when I try and use the internet on my phone or my mobile device. We've got a long way to go there. But I think it's just worth looking at the context of where we are. So in 2019, we had 6% gigabit coverage in the UK. We were by far the laggard of Europe. We're now at about 80% gigabit coverage. How did we get there? We got there by working with industry, by structuring the market so we could drive competition, healthy competition in the market, and get that investment into the market. It's been a runaway success. The shared rural network is a 50-50, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but it is a 50-50 enterprise between the mobile networks and the government, 500 million pounds each of investment. That is going great guns and delivering. But the thing that bothers me, the reason I've got this job, is about that rural economy piece. So how do we reach those communities who are very expensive to get to, where planning gets in the way, where they are expensive to dig trenches to lay cables to? And when I was appointed last June, it was that very dangerous period where MPs go off on recess, so I was left to my own devices. And I spent a lot of my time during that summer recess going and talking to industry. So the people who are actually digging trenches in the ground, who are putting cables up, who are connecting masts, the communities who are disconnected, who really, really need this stuff. And what I learned through them was absolutely fascinating. There are some very, very clear barriers in the planning process with getting some final, I'd say, incentives and directions to investors and to industry to unlock what we need to get to those places. But there are also barriers within government itself as well. We have, I think quite rightly, set ourselves this pedestal where we said we want gigabit connections, we want 5G connections, and yes, we do want 5G connections. But in many ways, that's holding us back as well, because we've set this ideology around where we need to get to, and we can't let perfect be the enemy of the good, to my mind. If we accept that actually there are wireless solutions available now that can roll out near gigabit very cheaply to communities who currently have no access to decent broadband, then we can reach these people who desperately need the connectivity that Steve was speaking about to game, to learn, to keep their rural economies alive. And I think it's worth reflecting exactly what those impacts are. You know, who are we trying to reach here? I was talking to, in the process of writing my report, a dairy farmer who, at the end of every single day, had to get on his tractor and drive to the hilliest part of his farm, because that's the only place where he could get mobile signal, and he would do his milk quotas on his phone, and it would take him an hour or so to do that. A job that should only take 20 minutes if he had a laptop with decent connectivity. You know, that is the kind of imposition we're putting on people's lives by not connecting them. I was speaking to another farmer, actually, but one up in Cumbria, whose village has slowly withered and started to die around him. This fantastic broadband company, Broadband for Rural North, Barn, rolled out gigabit-capable broadband to him and the few houses that were still there. Suddenly that village filled up again. But more than that, his children started coming home because they realised they could work from his property, and their jobs, I think one was in the city, one was a lawyer, you know, they could work remotely and they could do it in an environment where they really, really wanted to be, rather than schlepping out to a city to live a life that they weren't accustomed to and weren't very happy about. Now they could raise their families in those sorts of rural communities. In my own patch, I've got an architect who, and this one boggles your mind, who goes on Amazon and buys bulk SIM cards from Amazon and uses those to get on the internet, because there is no stable fixed broadband connectivity to his house. If for whatever reason that supply of bulk SIM cards runs out or is taken away, his business goes. And what he will do is what many, many people are doing now, voting with their feet and moving to more urban, more connected areas. So the exam question, you know, we've been asked to look at today is how to unleash the rural economy through better connectivity. I'd suggest actually it's got the answer in the question too. We unleash the rural economy through better connectivity. So what do we need to be doing to do that? Well, I think, you know, I've mentioned a couple of these things before. There are clear planning issues where, you know, I put recommendations into government around how we can ease some of those. There are signals we need to be sending to consumers. You know, we have built out a huge amount of gigabit-capable broadband at the moment, but take-up isn't as high as we would like it to be. So we need to be telling consumers about this. We need to be explaining to them why they should be future-proofing themselves and their families by upgrading some of this technology. But we also need to be sending those same messages to the market and to investors to get them to start to fund that final mile take-up. I'm not going to go anywhere near mergers. However, there are clear market efficiencies that we should be looking at. You know, we need clear competition in the market, and we need to be driving those incentives too. And I think, you know, if I can just land one more point, for communities like mine, I have a very, very dense urban area in Barrow, and then I have the Lake District National Park. We are seeing those communities beginning to die. You know, the visitor economy is so important to the Lake District. But when I talk to people who Airbnb out their properties or rely on visitors coming in, we are the largest visitor attraction. I say we, the Lake District is the largest visitor attraction in the UK. One of the reasons people don't stay there is that there isn't connectivity in those houses. And you are seeing an absolute divide between people who can go online, who can drive around, who know they've got a stable signal, and saying, I'm going to come to this place, or going 10 miles down the road where it's easier for them. And it is a very, very simple thing to fix. So I think government has to change its incentives and be a bit clearer about what it wants to achieve, and not letting perfect be the enemy of the good. We've got to send incentives to market, and we've got to do some planning reforms, and then we can get there and cover that final mile.
That's great, thank you. So we've heard from the Environment Secretary on kind of what the future of the rural economy is. We've heard from Andrea about what Vodafone's up to, from Simon about the different challenges. Sarah, could I come to you next? You're one of the strongest campaigning voices here. What would your big asks to government be?
I know, I think I'm going to be a bit of the Debbie Downer here on all of this. I mean, I absolutely welcome the ambition. Thank you first of all, inviting me here today, and I welcome the ambition that Secretary of State set out for rural communities and where digital connectivity can enhance it. It's nice to hear that we are just talking beyond social services and those kind of basic access. It is about revitalising the rural economy. I mean, a recent report says there's a potential remarkable of 65 billion that we can unleash if we unlock rural digital connectivity, and that's really important for us to do that. And that will see an 7% rise in employment in rural areas. We'll also see nearly 300,000 new fresh job opportunities. And this is all fantastic news and something we very much welcome. But it's not all good news out there. And someone who's been talking about this for the last 15 years, we have definitely seen improvements in digital connectivity in rural areas, and that's always to be welcomed. But it's still, as Vodafone's own report have shown, Ofcom's Connected Nations report, the recent National Audit Office report, still shows that rural communities are still lagging behind quite significantly from urban areas. In fact, if anything, probably compared to 15 years ago, the digital divide is bigger. Now, we need to tackle that, and we need to tackle it soon if we want to unleash this rural potential that we're all talking about and we're all really ambitious for. One of the areas we haven't talked about today is digital skills. And I think digital skills is one of the key areas that we need to unlock and to enable that people who get this super fast broadband, gigabit enabled, know how to use it. And they can set up their businesses locally. They can engage with people globally. And this is where we need to go to. And I think a report from the Good Things Foundation showed that for every pound we invest back into digital skills, we'll get nearly a £10 return. And that is unbelievable. That takes from for 1.4 billion investment up to nearly 14 billion. I don't know how we can't just accept these figures and just start committing and investing in rural communities. I know we've had a lot of consultations from the government, which is great, tackling the hard-to-reach areas. But what I really disappointed was there's no really timetable. There's no how money going behind that, and what does that look like? If I'm running a rural business, if I'm a farmer, if I'm a tourism operator, if I'm a small business, I need to know that certainty when I need to invest in my business. What does that look like? How can I future-proof and plan for the future? So really want a good clear direction with a good time scale. I'm going to keep it quite brief. I think we've covered a lot of issues. I'm sure people want to take questions from the floor, if that's okay.
Great, thank you very much. I will now open up the floor to questions from the audience, if anyone has any. I have a question at the back. Sorry, I think the mic's just coming to you.
Hi, I was wondering whether people have considered the likes of Starlink, so sort of a small satellite dish in these rural communities, because the pricing looks relatively cheap and affordable.
I'm going to check if there's other questions first so we can club some together. Any other questions on the floor at the moment? Cool. Let's answer this one. Anyone like to go first?
Yeah, so I can, as a technologist, I know a lot about Starlink. So we are already using Starlink for our backhaul connectivity. So because every mast with the antennas needs to have a means of aggregating that data back to your central nodes. So we're already using that. Completely relying on Starlink for ubiquitous and fast connectivity is not an option today in terms of technology. Because the amount of bandwidth, without getting too technical, the frequency that you have to use and the amount of frequency available in terms of bandwidth is very high, and you'll be taking away from terrestrial, and the technology is not quite mature yet. I do see, however, Starlink and other such satellite coverage solutions to provide the infills on the gaps, not as an alternative, but as a gap filler. And that will be over time. Over the next 6 to 10 years, we'll see how that technology evolves and provide. But today, it's not comparable to a gigabit solution. The bandwidth itself is very small to be able to provide individual homes coverage. And also remember that it's satellite, so it's not indoor, it doesn't penetrate indoor, so it would be outdoor, so you might have the same situation that Simon was discussing earlier in terms of the farmer having to go out on the hilltop to get that coverage. So there's limitations. We're not excluding it, but it needs to evolve, mature, but it's not an alternative to mobile coverage today.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions on the floor? In front, thank you.
Hi, Belinda Fawcett from Cornerstone. So we're the infrastructure provider in the UK. So we host Vodafone VMO2's equipment. I think my question is probably to you, Sarah, is that it's great to hear from Simon, who we've been speaking quite a lot over the last sort of few months. But we mentioned about planning, and one of the biggest issues that we have is the planning policy. And what we're finding is that we want to put our masts up so that we can host the equipment, but we get a lot of local resistance. So I hear what the Countryside Alliance are saying. We're desperate to put it all up in rural economies, and obviously to support our customers. But the amount of resistance from an environmental impact, and then that goes into the planning. And what we're finding is there's not a balance between the public interest, the public benefit of what everybody wants. We're sitting here talking about it, but actually the visual impact on the countryside. The Lake District is one of them. We've had numerous planning applications refused because people don't want the mast, but unfortunately you need the infrastructure if you want the connectivity. So I just wondered what your thoughts were on that.
I absolutely appreciate that. As an organisation, we have always supported actually the planning reforms to increase mast heights and mast size, because we absolutely recognise the greater benefits of delivering connectivity to rural communities. But I do appreciate that at a local level there has been a level of opposition. Now, when we've got involved at this level, we've tried to talk to communities, we've tried to talk to whether it's landowners or what the concerns are, and try to pick that broader picture. Best will in the world, we don't have the expertise or the infrastructure to get involved in every one, but it's something we very much push the message that if you want your community to thrive and survive, you need to support the delivery of connectivity. You know, we have electricity pylons, and that's a controversial debate at the moment in some parts of the country going up, but you know, we have all sorts of infrastructure that goes above the ground to connect us, and I think people need to be a little bit realistic about where the future is going. There are obviously lots of things we can do to make them more visually attractive, should we call it that? But it's a frustration that we also share with you.
And I know you know this because we've had this conversation before, but just for the benefit of everyone else. So my report includes a recommendation that we should have digital champions in every local authority around the country. They are clearly needed because the level of knowledge as to what is just modern planning practice and good planning practice is missing, but it's also the ability to have someone who can coordinate that knowledge across a whole local authority. We've got a really good one in Cumbria, and we do find it drives things forward. But I think the wider question is around the trickier areas. So again, using my own constituency as an example, I've got Lake District National Park in there. I have a mast built on concrete in the national park that the national park will not allow power to run to. And it's those sorts of challenges we have with large landowners, with national parks, with some of these arm's length bodies that are really, really difficult. And we need to be having conversations with them. And some of them get it. So I will not name a different national park, but there is one who recognises that for the visitor economy, to improve tourism, to improve the lives of the people who live within the national park that they need to improve that connectivity, and they are bending over backwards to do everything they can to get fixed line, to get wireless in there as well. We need a universal approach across all of these bodies.
Can I just come back and say, I was also say, it's about probably is engaging the likes of ourselves and our other rural colleagues in talking to those communities as well, and getting that message across. Say we are very pro digital connectivity and driving it forward, but I think we have a voice and a greater role to play in it as well.
I was just struck by a few things. Firstly, I wasn't aware of that example, and the Secretary of State that funds in part some of these organisations, so we can pick that up, Simon. Secondly, if you look at what we're trying to do, for example, on water, which is to take much more of a catchment approach, and I think one of the things is how we're looking at these places on a place-based basis. So where within the area is it best? Often I think communities feel it's very reactive in terms of how these are approached, whichever landowner it is that happens to come forward. So I think there's more there, and I think Simon's digital champions will help. I think that in turn sort of goes to something I remember George Osborne saying, which is the sighs of contentment are a lot quieter than the squeals of anguish. And so the protesters tend to be much more vocal than the wider community that are the beneficiaries. And therefore, I think the key there is taking that place-based approach, and being very transparent as to where the blockages are. So if I give you another example, we were looking at, for example, if you look at sort of the concern around metal from mines or contamination from mines into waterways. And one of the reasons the rollout of that remediation program has been slowed is because some of the remediation that needs to go by the waterway is blocked by the landowner. You then need to put in pipes for a very long distance with multiple consents that makes it very expensive, slow to deploy. But at the moment, there's very little transparency and accountability for those county councils who might be the ones that are dragging their feet, whilst also raising concerns around the water quality. So I think just thinking about the transparency as to exactly where the blockage is and how that is brought to light is a very good way of injecting pace. Because one of the things I think with all of this we tend to forget is in COVID, there are many challenges in COVID, but one of the things it demonstrated was it wasn't a lack of capability and skill. Actually, things could be done at great pace when the will was there. And there were a lot of things that happened at huge pace, which in normal times would have taken a huge amount more. And it was because there was an urgency of transparency and some accountability in terms of getting those decisions. So I think on where you've got planning blockages, what I'd be very keen to understand is who is the blockage, where is it, why, what alternatives have they had? And as a proof point, if you take, for example, one of the more famous ones recently where Jeremy Clarkson was raising concerns on farming, you'll see that actually Michael Gove's just agreed with DEFRA a number of permitted development rights that address that very point. So the point is it can be done, but it needs transparency so that where there is a blockage, people can be held to account.
I want to build on that. I completely agree. Having that transparency, and we want to be really practical, on a day-to-day basis, when we get a rejection, we're sometimes surprised by the rejection because we didn't know that that particular area was concerned about the bogland or protecting peregrine falcons or what. Having that transparency and that early visibility preempts us to be able to address it in an open, collaborative way. The digital champion that Simon proposes is also an excellent means of ensuring consistency in the requests, so that we almost can create a factory of planning, standard planning approvals and applications and approvals that enables us to really roll out fast, rather than going through a lengthy planning process and then finding that there's a document missing or there's a particular concern that we haven't yet addressed. I think that's really simple to do. And we have offered, in our interaction with all the chief executives of the various local planning authorities, I've personally written to them saying, tell us early what you're concerned about. We will not shy away from your concern. We will responsibly address them. But if we know them early, we can address them and we can inject pace.
I might abuse my position as chair to ask a question, and that's kind of the inverse of what we've been talking about, which is what is the opportunity cost of not acting on this right now? What does it mean for the UK's regional divides? What does it mean for the relationships between sort of towns and cities, rural versus urban? I might put the question out to the entire panel, whoever would like to come in.
I think we'll see our rural communities wither and die. I think it's as simple as that. Digital connectivity, data, the online world is part of our future, and they need to compete and take part and be part of that world as much as those living in urban areas. There's a huge amount of opportunity in rural communities. It is not at the moment unleashed, to use that phrase, and I think we need to embrace that opportunity and we need to support them. So I'm going to be very negative.
Maybe I can give you some really concrete stats. So we've done some modeling that suggests that the cost to the UK economy of having a poor investment environment is up to 4.6 billion. So if you have a poor investment, that's how much it's actually costing you. If, by contrast, you have a good investment, the circle, that virtuous circle starts kicking in, and you've got a benefit of 2.8 billion. So you're moving from actually losing 4.3 to gaining 2.8. If I look at a specific area of the UK, Scotland, very rural, 91% of Scottish rural areas are a 5G hotspot, as opposed to just 20 in equivalent urban areas. Scotland has 62% is more likely to have a hotspot than English rural area. If you address that for the Scottish economy, you can deliver up to 9.3 billion of additional productivity. I mean that, you know, those numbers are staggering. 91% of Scotland doesn't have 5G, as opposed to 20 the rural area, as opposed to 20 in the urban areas. And if you start addressing that, you unleash 9.3 billion worth of economic benefit.
It's good to see some numbers put to that. Go ahead.
I was just going to add to that. So if you talk to the Chancellor or the PM, what they care about is productivity and growth. And that is what connecting rural communities enables. It enables massive uplifts in productivity. It enables growth. But it also enables, as we've all said on this panel already, the sustainability of these rural communities. We are moving to a digital future. In fact, we've moved to a digital future. And we risk increasing that digital divide, not making it smaller if we don't connect these people. And I'll use an example again, Belinda, I apologise because you've heard this one again. So Belinda and Hamish over there came to my constituency a little while ago and did a rural connectivity summit. And one of my constituents gave the example. I also do a fraud job for government, I should say. So I get very concerned about people keeping their information secure. And one of my constituents gave an example of when they do mobile banking, the connection at their house with their fixed line broadband is not strong enough for them to get their mobile signal through it. So when she tries to log on to her mobile banking, she has to send her son out with her mobile phone to drive up the hill to where he can get a mobile signal so he can get the one-time passcode on his phone to drive back to the house before it expires so she can then log into her mobile banking to do that. Now, she is not going to be the only person in that absolutely ridiculous situation. But the fact is we are not making allowances for people in that position. We are increasingly putting our services online. So this isn't just about enabling farmers to farm in a more efficient way. It's not just about making sure that people can come and visit these fantastic rural communities and stay there or grow businesses there. It's about allowing the people who are there now to transact in the same way that you and I do when we're walking around London. Yeah, that's what's at stake here, and that's why it matters.
Well, I think firstly it's always quite difficult to put a specific figure on, you know, Simon's sheep farmer that doesn't have to drive to the edge of the field and the time saved, whether it's on form filling for an RPA grant or accessing public services or unlocking labour productivity and so forth. I think probably I'd link it just as an illustration to three areas. So if I take, for example, the big political debate on immigration and labour, within the agriculture sphere, seasonal agricultural workers don't actually appear in the immigration figures, but is obviously part of that debate. If you take a pack house and automate that, you need significantly less labour, and you're taking away some of the less attractive jobs and actually going, so not everything in agriculture is ready to be automated, but we can see in certain sectors where there, so it feeds into the immigration debate. If you take the debate on housing, we've touched on the fact that actually one of the constraints sometimes to people living in rural areas is if there isn't that connectivity, that it restricts their career opportunities. So again, you start to spread that debate in terms of housing. And then I give you perhaps a slightly abstract one, but just to illustrate the point of why I think agri-tech is very interesting, just in terms of not just its economic growth potential, its importance to food security and actually our ability to grow more. But if I take something like the humble strawberry, so in terms of healthy eating, we consume 10% of the strawberries in winter to what we do in summer. Why is that? Because they're grown to travel. They're therefore not grown so much in terms of the taste. They've got to be resilient. Whereas if you produce them at home, in a glass house here, obviously much healthier food. You don't have the food miles on the environment. The labour is working in a much more pleasant environment, picking a crop at waist height as opposed to off the ground and so forth. So you start to change the skills mix, but you also bring these wider benefits, whether it's the lorry movements or the access to labour and so forth. So you open up different types of productivity. How you score all of those is not always easy to quantify. But what we can see is very significant economic benefits in the rural economy in ways that currently are not unlocked.
I'm actually Countryside Alliance working a project for Future Countryside at the moment, and it's being held in a couple of weeks' time. But we've been asking people to say in one word what the countryside they want to see in 10 years' time. And the biggest kind of one to come out is sustainable, thriving, resilient, productive. And this is what people want for the future of the countryside. And I think, you know, part of that is delivering that digital connectivity to go with it. And so the ambition's out there in rural areas, and we just need to match it with, you know, us guys sitting here.
More questions from the audience? We have one up here and another one here. Can we take both, please?
Thank you. I'm Rupert Matthews, Police and Crime Commissioner for Leicestershire and Rutland. And I just wanted to flag up the huge potential of this for crime prevention and indeed for catching criminals. I'll just give you one example, if I may. We've got a number of mobile number plate reading cameras, which we can program. If there's a vehicle the police are interested in or vehicles that have been seen in proximity to a crime, you can program that camera so that as soon as the vehicle goes past, it automatically contacts the control room. They can send the nearest police car to go and have a word. And in rural areas, as I'm sure you're all aware, there are vehicles that are known to go and scout out farms and other rural businesses, and then lo and behold, 2 or 3 days later, the sheep are stolen, the tractor's stolen, and so on. The reason why we can't deploy those cameras there is because we can't connect them to the control room. So that's just one example, but I really just wanted to flag up this isn't just about the economy, it's not about, there is a real use that the police could have if there was a connectivity in rural Rutland, which is a real black spot for us.
Can we get this next question as well?
I was just going to say, we did some research about 6-7 years ago, mapping mobile phone not spots with Hampshire's crime incidents of crime, and we found that there was a high level of crime in mobile phone not spots because the criminals knew they could get away with it and nobody had to connect them and call the police in.
Maybe I can explain why the merger actually addresses those concerns from the word go. It's very simple. If the merger is allowed to progress, immediately from day one, Vodafone customers will have access to the 3 masts and signal and vice versa. Net, 25% of the current not spots will immediately be removed because each customer base will have access to each other's frequencies. There'll be 65% more capacity being introduced into the network. We'll have access to each other's spectrum holding. Without getting too technical, if you have low band frequencies, it goes much further, covering much more of those not spots. And the beauty of all of this, we're not asking government to help us fund that. Because by bringing the 2 companies together, going from the current asset base to 33,000 sites and then reducing those down to 25,600 to 25,700, the synergies, the savings that come from that will be reinvested in the network, 11 billion. 6 billion of those in the first 5 years of the 10-year investment. And therefore, it's a self-sustaining business case that enables us to immediately start addressing that without having to ask government for money, as we've had to do with the shared rural network. So, and it's immediate because the sites are there. The masts are built. We don't have to build them. We have to integrate them. We have to add our frequencies to their mast and their frequencies to our mast, but they're there. So almost immediately, the fastest possible way, we can start addressing some of those concerns. The alternative would be a lot of capital investment, a long period of time to build, lay the foundations, lay the cement, build the mast, find a willing site provider. We bypass all of that.
Thank you. We had a question up front.
Thank you. Hamish McLeod from Mobile UK. Perhaps I'm addressing to Simon, because you're not allowed to talk about the merger, and nor am I. But can I just talk about a couple of other policy areas which might contribute positively? One is around spectrum fees, which were introduced 20 odd years ago in order to promote efficient use of spectrum. And I think we could argue now that it has achieved that objective, and taking 300 million a year out of the industry is not a good use of resources, and actually allowing the networks to retain that money and to invest in their network would be a very positive step. The second policy area, which I think needs looking at, is in relation to traffic management. We are, as a country and globally, really, broadcast TV is starting to wither away, and we're all consuming television at your convenience, and that is impacting the broadband networks, and it is also impacting the mobile networks. And we've got ourselves into a slightly ridiculous situation. If you want a premium Netflix channel, HD or whatever, you pay more to them, but the networks are the ones that invest in the capacity to deliver it and getting no money. So I think there's a big argument for re-looking at our traffic management rules and preparing us for the day when actually DTT will be switched off properly.
Thank you for those very easy questions, Hamish. I really hope when I left the mobile sector some 15 years ago, I'd never have to think about spectrum again, but I'm delighted you brought it up. So you make an absolutely valid point around that, and it's something I've raised with officials, and it's something I'll continue to talk to them about. On the sort of wider net neutrality bit, I don't know whether we've put that argument to bed or not, but you're not the only person making that point, and it has been well heard.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions in the audience? Can we get one from this side of the room, please?
Hi there, Karen Egan from Enders Analysis. Maybe a question to Steve and to Simon. Again, it's kind of an issue about the industry, kind of the mobile industry and also the fixed industry. Really kind of a high-level question mark about policy, and really, has it been the right thing to prioritize intense network competition, where such that we now have many towns and cities with maybe 4 competing fixed networks, obviously 4 competing mobile networks, and then we have rural areas that have none of the above. And really, should there be kind of some rebalancing of kind of the government approach to prioritize roll out into areas that don't have it, rather than duplicating areas that do?
Great question.
Well, I think one always looks at the balance on these things. I think fundamentally competition is good, drives innovation, drives pace, and on behalf of the taxpayer pound, we would always want to try and attract commercial operators to invest where they can, with the expertise and skills that they bring and the innovation. And the 5 billion that we've allocated is because we recognise there's limits to the areas that will be attractive to that, and that's where the state has therefore put in additional funding. And again, it's not a surprise that commercially people will look at the same set of data and conclude that those are the attractive areas that people want to move into. I think where we want to very much work with the industry is where are there sensible areas for cooperation. And I think we're seeing that with the shared mass and some of the rules there. There are also common challenges that all the industry players face, so we touched on that with the planning. So there will be a place for competition. There is also a place in terms of cooperation, and the devil's in the detail of that, and we're very keen to work with you to unlock that.
I think you answered that very well. I'm not sure I've got that much more to add, but I would say that 80% figure I mentioned, or it's 80+% figure I mentioned at the beginning now in terms of gigabit coverage, that has come because of competition, and because we have done everything we possibly can to spur that. Now that has led to overbuilds. I'm not going to deny that for a second. But actually, I think the question's got to be, how do we spur competition into the rural areas where there currently isn't connection? And that's some of the work that's going on through the SRN. It's some of the 5 billion that Steve mentioned. But it's also to the point earlier when we were asked about Starlink. satellite connectivity. Like, this stuff really matters. It does provide an option for people in rural areas, but I don't want my constituents in the Lake District National Park to have one option and to be stuck on one price that they can't change. I want them to have a range of choices, and we've got to work with industry to make sure we can spur those choices to be available to people. And I think we're getting there. But there's more we can do, and that's partly what my report is all about, just easing those changes so we can get to a position where we've got greater competition in rural areas.
Thank you. I think we have time for one final question from the front here.
Hi, I'm Sean McHenry, Head of Town Planning at Cornerstone, so a little bit battle-scarred from working on the SRN for the past few years. But everybody here today has talked about unbelievable applications for connectivity, IoT, drones, agri-tech, put some brilliant figures to it. My experience is that local government decision makers don't fully understand those applications and the benefits that can come with it. And because of that, they struggle to add appropriate weight whenever they're making determinations to kind of counterbalance perceived harm and stuff like that. So the question is really, what can government do to really promote and publicise and communicate those benefits so that it can be kind of given the full understanding? And would government go as far as updating the NPPF, National Planning Policy, to align with that communication so that officers at a local level can start adding appropriate weight to those benefits?
Thank you for your question. Over to you, Secretary of State.
Yep. So first, I agree with the challenge, which is, I mentioned earlier the take-up. If that's 28%, then clearly there's comms challenge. I think it's not just for government. So I think industry has a role to play. They have very good skilled marketing and comms teams, in my experience, so they have an important role as well. I know Ofcom has touched on terminology in their report. There's the issue of one-touch switching as well. So I think there's things out there that will help. I think to the specific point with local authorities, it's really what I was mentioning before, which is the precision and I think how we help them. So local authorities, many competing pressures. So how do we make this more visible? Because usually local politicians, local officials will be dealing with the immediate, and a lot of these about benefits for a time in the future, hopefully in the shorter to medium term. And I think therefore the transparency on what the benefits is and how we help give them some comfort in making those decisions when there may be a smaller number of voices, but putting up some obstacles. Because I think ultimately the case here is very strong. And I think that actually therefore this is an argument that should be won. And I think there's a role both for government and for the sector and for organisations in terms of how we make that simpler to understand. And I think the terminology around this is also part of that.
With that, I think we've run out of time. 3 quick thank yous. Thank you to Vodafone for kindly supporting this event, to all the panelists for their time,